Has there ever been a period of history where human beings have collectively felt this uncertain? Our modern time is described as an age of disruption and anxiety. As individual people, we have exponentially more access to the entire world, and yet, it is this grand access that is most disorienting and challenging to us today. If we look back on human history as if it were one grand cosmic opera, perhaps we would see a series of acts and movements, various ages that our ancestors lived through. We would see long periods of lull where generations upon generations experience little change or progress. And we would also see periods of time so volatile and chaotic, full of rapid change and growth, civilizations rising and falling, human ingenuity and innovation exploding, and the very way of life evolving. So much of our modern context feels like the latter. It feels like the world is going at light speed, that it's going out of control. It's both exciting, but also terrifying because of what we can do just with our fingertips and a screen. And all this change and progress amounts to this feeling of inescapability, this need to be perpetual beginners and learners, being humbled every day as one thing becomes outdated, as another thing arrives and tells us that there are new possibilities. This is what our modern age feels like. Things like social media, which is still in its infancy. No wonder we are constantly fumbling it up and experiencing the consequences of the unfettered and intrusive access we have to each other. We can't rely on tradition. We can't rely on what has happened in the past. It is all brand new. The response from many of us is to heavily moderate, or even stronger, resist and reject, especially the church, to disconnect from the technological arms race and to dismiss it altogether. And yet, it seems like the digital dimension continues to creep into our lives, even infiltrating the basic necessities that we experience every single day. And certainly the church is not immune. It feels these effects as much as anyone else. And the question becomes, how do we address all of these challenges faithfully? Where does our faith transcend the rising tide of our digitizing environment? And are there areas or opportunities in this change where our faith is being called to go and integrate? Today, sociologists are observing that we are in the midst of a network revolution, a phenomenon in human history where the primary medium for human communication and interaction is shifting and changing into something fundamentally different, something fundamentally more powerful. The last time a network revolution of this scale happened was in the 16th century when Johann Gutenberg invented and introduced the printing press to the world. Prior to this period of time, the primary medium for communication and learning and community development was through speech, orality. Walter J. Ong, the famous Jesuit historian, wrote about how societies prior to the 16th century were of primary orality, thought and verbal expression within cultures totally untouched by any knowledge of writing or print. For us modern people, it is difficult for us to conceive of an oral culture precisely because we are a 600-year product of print. But imagine daily life that heavily relied on listening with no easy way to write down what you heard so that you could recall it later. If you didn't pay attention to information, a conversation, a lesson, some news from a distant place, then there was no way for you to retrieve that information. You were totally reliant on the testimony of others. Now, of course, paper and books did exist prior to the printing press, but they were only accessible to a few, the elite, the powerful, the rich. Much of Europe was illiterate, and it wasn't necessarily a disadvantage because the culture was driven by speech, by the oral traditions. But at the same time, to be able to read and to access books was astoundingly advantageous, and the primary partaker would have been the church. But what happens when an invention is discovered like the printing press, and that invention introduces print, this powerful, revolutionary technology? And then this print becomes so accessible, so cheap, that the vast majority of society can now partake also. When a new medium is introduced, it creates disruption. It creates decentralization of power and influence. It also creates power struggles and power vacuums as new players challenge the old institutions. It fundamentally changes how societies function and connect and communicate and learn. But why is that? The most important point in understanding the implications of a primary medium switch is that it doesn't just afford new conveniences or better strategies or more efficiencies. It creates an entirely different world, one that may look similar to the old on the outside, but underneath is entirely different. The DNA of the society has changed completely. This famous idea was coined by the great Canadian communication theorist Marshall McLuhan when he said the medium is the message. It's the idea that the medium itself has as much influence on meaning as does the content that depends on it. And so the medium itself should be the primary focus of attention and critique, especially in an age where the medium is just being introduced. Today, it is obvious to us that print, books, and the ability to read, store, and recall information is essential to our way of life. It's how we build our institutions, like our educational system. It's how we do banking. It's how we communicate to one another and develop new businesses, new technologies. The medium has become both the avenue and the foundation of our modern societies. But remember what I said at the beginning of this video. We are living in a period of time that can be accounted for as another network revolution. A time period where we are shifting away from print into something quite possibly even more exhilarating and terrifying. A digital medium that doesn't just combine audio, video, and print, both stored and recalled in endless configurations, but an intelligent, anticipatory medium, one that analyzes, predicts, and thinks. Perhaps a medium that not only just functions as the avenue and the foundation of a society, but now becomes a co-architect. We once again brace for chaos. Humanity once again must examine the biases and the preferences we have inherited and built unknowingly from living in a print universe. It's all we know. And now we must begin to wonder what a world with a totally new medium will look like. A medium that surpasses anything that has come before it. For the church, our hope has never been placed in the happenings of the world. On the contrary, our hope is found in our faith in God the Father, the Son, Jesus Christ, who has reconciled us through his death and resurrection, and in the Spirit of God that dwells in us and is working amongst us today, ushering in the new kingdom of God. As we consider how God is orchestrating the drama of human history, we are reminded about the grace that we have to be invited as a witness and as a servant to God, reconciling all things back to himself. The temptation will be to be disobedient and arrogant, forgetful of our prime directive, and fearful of what the future holds. We shouldn't look upon technology with disdain or fear. It's God ordained. It was created by God, purposed to reveal himself in extraordinarily new ways. It's created to aid the church, and the ensuing challenges, We will not meet alone. Through the trials of the world breaking and reforming, the faithful remnant church will be disciplined and refined to continue to be salt and light once more. As the lighthouse of God's faithfulness, let us be the first to humble ourselves, listen and learn, identifying the signs of this new age, and being both pioneers and guides in this new digital wilderness. This is the Inevitable Church.